Okay, let's finally turn to the Q&A. Can all of our panelists turn their videos on? And I can go through the Q&A. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, let's turn to the first question. Jim and Heather. The first question, what can we expect regarding pricing if we are forced out of the standard market and into surplus and excess markets?
Looks like Heather's staying on mute, so I'll go.
Okay.
We touched on it a little bit, and it's a lot of variables in there. But we're also seeing a lot of that happen. And I think part of the problem is that the only thing that people have to go on as far as estimating where they're at price-wise is what they paid last year. And when that market goes away, suddenly you're thrust out, and in those cases, you could be, we've seen a lot of instances where it's 2 times, 3 times, 300%. That's not AOAO business in Hawaii, but that's certainly a hard market reality in other places. I would say probably a guide, if you were going from a standard market into the ENS and you were forced to layer a lot of limits and capacity, you'd probably easily be looking at 40, 50% increase in rate and premium.
Okay, any comments, Heather?
No, I would agree. I mean, I think it depends if there's losses and, the risk itself. I mean, if it was non-renewed due to losses, we could certainly see more. The issue that we have, as Jim mentioned, is layering, using multiple markets. So if we have to go from, like a single Dongbu doing 1 carrier full limits to, 6, 8, 10 carriers, it gets up into the 2, 3, 4 times of what it was last year pretty quickly, especially if there's losses. Just as an example, this isn't Hawaii, but I just did a wildfire account that was single carrier, full limits of like 150 million, and we were only able to find part of that capacity. It took 14 carriers, and it was 5 or 6 times the premium. So different. That's pretty extreme, but that's kind of the worst of the worst. So
I think it's probably worth pointing out that you're not always in control of this. It could be loss experience, but it could be some total unexpected change in the carrier's appetite that you're with, that they choose to exit the market. They choose not to write AOAO if they're frame and within 500 feet of the ocean or something. And that alone would be a reason that you might get thrust out of the admitted market.
Okay, thank you. I have another question here. Ron, we're going to go to you on this one. Is there any advantage insurance-wise to a high-rise condo, 14 floors, being a non-smoking building?
Well, I guess the short answer is not a lot of advantage. Whether you're smoking or non-smoking, the underwriters really look at the fire protection in that building. That's going to drive it. Do they have adequate smoke detectors? Do they have adequate fire extinguishers? Do they have standpipes? Do they have sprinkler systems? Those are the key factors in underwriters looking at a building, whether it's a smoke-free environment versus a smoking environment. Maybe Jim is in the ENS market, but the local carriers certainly don't have credits for that particular exposure.
Probably important to distinguish that the risk of fire is only one small piece of the premium, particularly in Hawaii, and that a smoking policy would, even if that were the case, even if you could show that you were going to have better loss experience because of that, it's only a small credit to a smaller portion of the premium.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. We have another question, Ron. We're going to go to you again on this one. How do you know if your agent has access to all the competitive markets? And how often do you recommend your agent survey the property or project? So a two-part question from the same person.
Well, how do you know? Well, I guess the short answer is you need to ask your agent. If they're in the business, they should know whether they have access to the, as I pointed out, there's a very limited marketplace. So you could pretty much ask them, if you're a high rise, do you have access to all three markets, or basically all the standard markets? It it's so limited. Now the other question was, how often should you market? Or
How often do you recommend an agent survey the property or project?
well, probably every 3 to 5 years, and a lot depends upon the property. If they're making a lot of changes and stuff, we have a couple of properties that are going through total remodeling. They're doing spalding work, they're repainting, they're doing work on the railings and stuff. We would probably say you should inspect those a little more often, because truthfully, I'd like to go out after they do all that work and take more pictures, because it gives a better portrait of that client to underwriters. So certainly the ones that are going through a lot of changes, certainly you're going to need to go out more often.
Okay, thank you. Great question. Let's go to Lisa and Donna next. Is the property considered oceanfront if it does not have direct access and out of a tsunami zone?
Typically not. It wouldn't be considered ocean. Again, in an umbrella liability excess market, the underwriters are going to be reviewing the website. If the website has any type of water sports activities, or has a surf or a paddleboard vendor on site, that's really what's going to kick it to that ocean side. I mean, we insure a one condo that has, a street in between them and the ocean, but they can still get their paddle boards and walk across the street to the ocean and use the paddle boards in a rental purpose. So it really kind of just depends. But I would say, to answer that specific question, no, wouldn't be considered ocean.
Okay, thank you. Alex, you have the next question. We're going to go to you. Have you seen an incident when an AOL director is accused of bullying an employee? And the second part of that question is, what is the liability? I'm sorry, what is liability of the entire AOL for this type of behavior?
Sure, absolutely. So we, as you mentioned, we insure a lot of associations across the country. So we see, the gambit of claims, and we have seen this claim, several times. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say there's an epidemic unfortunately, of directors or board members bullying employees, but it does come up sometimes. And it's really it's wrongful infliction of emotional distress is what's going to come down to. And you're going to want to make sure that you have some type of employment practice liability, EPLI coverage, on the book. So, definitely contact your agent and make sure you do have some type of coverage to make sure that, that you are covered in case that does happen.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I have another question for you, Alex. It sounds like, Alex, you're saying that a person can enter an elevator without a mask, or is that what you are saying? This is from your earlier presentation, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I don't remember saying that, but I'm sorry if it came across that way. I'm not saying that. I'm definitely saying, you should always look at your governing documents, make sure if they don't say anything, a lot of times, because COVID came with such a surprise that many governing documents didn't have anything to address the epidemic, but you should look at them, contact an attorney, contact an agent. And when you make rules, follow state, local, and federal guidelines. That's probably the best answer I can give you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go back to Jim and Heather. I have a question here. What property lines of insurance are the most difficult to place? Earthquake, flood, business interruption, and what kinds of increases are you seeing? Jim or Heather? Sorry, Jim, you're on mute.
It's on mute. I think that one's kind of situational as well. You know, if we're in Hilo, flood and quake is much more difficult than flood and quake in, you know, Oahu, I would say, depending on, again, the zones and that kind of stuff. So I think it's situational would be my generic answer.
Okay.
Jim?
Yeah, we see a wide variety. Frame on the beach, certainly going to be a different sort of marketplace, and the most difficult in our market. Large limits also going to, just because of the cost of capacity, the cost to build all the limits, anything over 100 million is also going to be a little bit more difficult in today's market. Again, back to the admitted versus non-admitted scenario.
Okay, thank you. Ron, we're going to go to you on this one. Should a condotel allow a building to be smoking, especially if residents have asthma?
Well, there's somewhat of a slide over onto the DNO side. Should they allow that? A lot has to do with the building rules. If you have a non-smoking building, obviously it's up to the directors and officers or the board members to be sure that they enforce the rules. Now, if the rules are not there, the directors and officers still have an obligation to allow peaceful usage of the unit. So if you have a unit owner that has asthma, and they can't use their unit well because the neighbor smokes or something, I think then they have to try to see what they can do to prevent smoking next door or whatever. So it's just a matter of the association directors and officers have somewhat of an obligation for quiet usage or rightful usage of each of the unit owners. And if some of the things like smoking affects that, then they have an obligation to try to see what they can do to fix that.
Okay.
I can tell you on a liability standpoint too, specific to condotels, because they are typically hooked to a hotel, is that 90% of all hotels do not allow smoking on premises, or they have a designated spot. And so when they rent those units out on behalf of the condo unit owner, those rules are definitely also provided on the hotel's website as well.
Thank you. We'll go to Donna and Lisa on this one for the umbrella. For high-rise AOAOs that do not have fire sprinklers but pass the Honolulu City and County fire and safety inspection because of other safety features in the building, will these AOAOs have a chance to be insurable again under your umbrella program or the other standard AOAO umbrella programs?
I can speak to our program, in which we do have a series of about 10 carriers involved within our programs, that they have pretty strict fire life safety guidelines in respects to high rises. Now, as I mentioned in my previous slide, an 8 to 20 story, so that's a pretty broad range. If they're not sprinklered, we require standpipes and a building-wide alarm. So they don't have to be sprinklered, but they do have to have standpipes and a building-wide alarm. If they're over 20 stories, it would be rejected in our program if it's not 100% sprinklered. And this not is only within Hawaii, because a lot of the older cities, LA, Chicago, New York, Boston, they all have big high rises of 40 stories that aren't sprinklered. So we do kind of take those into consideration if they've got some exposure there. The biggest part of why they're not handled on an umbrella liability side is that people are sleeping. They're asleep. You don't smell the smoke. You don't wake up to an alarm. you don't have time to get out of the building. And so that's why it is really important to make sure that either you have a standpipe to at least protect the stairwells, so you're at least safe once you close those fire doors and the stairwells and get out of that building.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Next question we have goes to Alex. Alex, what is the state of the AOL DNO market, and is Hawaii treated differently than the mainland?
Right. So as we've all been talking, the state of the market is rough, right? To put it softly and short. But you know, it's not alone as in the rest of the United States. You guys aren't singled out. If you look at Southern California, New York, and Southeast Florida, they're a little bit behind you guys in the perilous charge of rate increase, but they're right there as well. I mean, we have very tough underwriting with them. We don't make any exemptions. So you guys aren't alone. The market's tough, but you know, you'll get through it with Atlas. So that's all I got to say about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Ron, we have a question for you. Would the reserve study help as well?
Well, the reserve study is really a study of making sure that they have adequate money to do the repairs. And as we talked about, certainly the reserve studies could help to show an underwriter that we're going to redo this roof in 2 years, or we're going to be replumbing in a certain amount of time, to at least let the underwriters know that you are planning and you will be doing the repairs within a certain amount of time. At least it shows that in the reserve studies that have certain elements to them. But you know, for those who need it now, no, but it certainly can help show that a association is accumulating the funds to do this, and we'll start next year or something pretty immediate type of thing. So yes, it can help.
Okay, thank you. Next question for Lisa and Donna. Does your surplus umbrella market allow for buildings that are non-sprinklered, or is this a requirement for all your programs?
Well, again, kind of just going back to what I touched based on, because we are dealing with liability. And by the way, we're not surplus. We actually are admitted in most all of our markets. And so, but again, it just goes back to liability. You're sleeping. You need an alarm to wake you up and get out of the building. If it's 8 to 20 stories, standpipe system with a building alarm is satisfactory within our program. Anything over 20, it does have to be 100% sprinkler.
Okay, thank you. Next question for Ron or Alex. Is it wise to have a Hawaiian director on the board such that he or she can respond more quickly than a mainland director to any of the concerns? So I guess location.
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe Ron, you can shed some light on that a little bit more, but I'll just say that you brought up a good point. Communication is absolutely key in mitigating any claim before it happens. You know, association members do not like, their residents don't like to be surprised by something. So if you have somebody who has consistent communication and can answer stuff quick, it can sort of stop them away from the idea that, man, I need to get an attorney. I'm getting upset. I'm sitting here in my, you know, my unit thinking about how I'm going to sue this person versus getting a, you know, a answer quicker. So, I mean, there is an sort of an expect some lag time between getting an answer. So if you want that answer immediately and you got somebody in California, there might be some lag time. It all depends. But Ron, I don't know if you feel the same way. You should have somebody from home.
Well, certainly I do feel pretty much it is better to have a certain amount of the directors and officers. But as we found, most of our boards have a lot of the board members are on the mainland. And with the communication systems nowadays, you know, we are seeing a ton more Zoom meetings just like this, where people can communicate more rapidly, I guess, and address the issues. So it's obviously better have somebody boots on the ground right there, but depends upon how the associations are set up for good communications, which is the key.
Mhm.
Okay, great. We're just going to take one more last question here because we're just about time's up. This is just for the, I guess, the group, not really for the group, but maybe Ron or Heather or someone can answer this one. Is the roof condition and data important to underwriters for property renewals?
Well, the short answer is absolutely. Uh, you know, when I guess it's the old loss control part of me. That's how I started in this business. But, you know, the first thing I do when I look at a building is I like to go up on the roof of a high rise, and I like to look at, well, it's a great view, obviously, around, so I can look at the exposures easily. But I also check for roofs, the roof condition, uh, for a couple reasons. One, it just sort of gives me a insight in terms of how well is this building being maintained. Uh, you know, uh, associations, if they've put deferred maintenance and stuff like that, and the roof is not in very good condition, I can tell you that it just tells a story in itself. So we're supposed to represent the associations. So obviously I'm not going to bring that up to the carriers, but it tells me a lot about it. And it's something that, you know, the underwriter's going to ask that question anyway. When was the roof last updated? It's a question in almost all the applications. So yeah, roof condition is very important.
Great. Heather, Jim, you have anything to say about that? Any more comments?
In our marketplace, you would typically see an ACV, actual cash value limitation, if it's anything older than 10 or 15 years. We frequently have to talk carriers through that. It's a big mainland issue that because of hail and so forth. So we're always convincing underwriters that it's not as big a problem in Hawaii as other places, but it's a reality.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
Sean, I would
Yeah.
also add to that on a liability sense, we ask for the same thing, both in a general liability and an excess for properties that are older than 1995. And again, it goes back to what Ron and Jim both said. It shows a maintenance commitment from the owners.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, now that we've come to the end, you may ask yourself, what can we do to prepare for the hard market now? Well, the first step is to getting a free comprehensive coverage review from our AOAO team. We can also provide our audience today with a high risk component checklist, and this will be helpful in managing your AOAOs. And finally, on behalf of Atlas Agency, I want to thank all of our speakers on their insights. Jim Sipich and Heather Dugan from CRC Group, Donna Percival and Lisa Rogers from the Distinguished Programs, Alex Montclair from Kevin Davis, and our own Ron Tsukamaki from Atlas Insurance. It looks like we got through all the questions, so I'm excited to touch bases with you. If you have any more, that you can email me. Our information or my information is on the bottom. Registered attendees will receive a copy of this recorded webinar. I want to thank everyone for attending. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be with us. And aloha.
Aloha.